How's it going, everyone? So, I've been under the impression that prageru is basically discredited. It's received a lot of critique by people who know what they're talking about, and in a rational world, that would mean their popularity would decrease. But that isn't happening. Instead, prageru is as popular as ever, with people just falling for this shit again and again. I happened across a recent video of theirs titled Exposing the Truth About Republicans. It's currently sitting at about 200,000 views with a like-dislike ratio of 0.8, and it's awful. The host, Witt, correctly attributes the abolition of slavery, the first attempt at black voting rights, and the party of the first black congressman, Hiram Revels, to the Republicans. Conversely, Democrats were on the opposite side of each of these issues. Further, Republicans and Democrats disagreed on policies which would expand federal power and economic regulation. The period after the Civil War, for example, saw the South opposed to the federal Republican project of Reconstruction, with the North having to send its army south to enforce black male voting rights in 1867. Black people faced intimidation tactics, physical abuse, and possible death at the hands of Southerners by groups like the KKK and the public at large. It's important to not romanticize the role of the Republican Party during this period. They were largely pro-black rights to the extent that it allowed them to spread their power and influence on the South, rather than any genuine humanitarian concern. This is evidenced by how Reconstruction ended, ceding racist Southern Democrats perpetual control of the South in exchange for a term in the White House. Thank you, Rutherford B. Hayes. After the end of Reconstruction, the KKK became even more powerful, making voter suppression and life for black Americans even worse. Now, with a time span of 30 years discussed, what happened to the parties? I mean, obviously, as time passes, things change, right? Simply because a group did something in the past doesn't mean the current incarnation exhibits the same beliefs and ideology, right? So, for time's sake, let's just ask a couple questions. What party gave women the right to vote? Democrats, under Woodrow Wilson. What party advocated social programs to deal with the income inequality and horrible economic conditions of the 1930s? Democrats, under Franklin Roosevelt's The New Deal. What party advocated for civil rights in the post-World War II era? Democrats, beginning with Harry Truman's speech at the Democratic Convention in 1948. Probably seeing the struggle of people of all colors during the Great Depression allowed for a small recognition of our common humanity. Regardless, a faction called the Dixiecrats split from the Democratic Party during this era, indicating promoting civil rights was indeed a shift from the party's traditional platform. Finally, after Lyndon Johnson signed into law the 1864 Civil Rights Act and 1865 Voting Rights Act, the Southern Democrats, who didn't defect from the party when the Dixiecrats jumped ship a decade before, happily jumped into bed with Republicans. The transition wasn't discrete, it was a continuous shift. You had people like the Democrat George Wallace arguing for segregation while running for president in 1972, while Nixon was employing the Southern strategy to appeal to Southern white voters in the late 1960s. However, by the election of Ronald Reagan, the voting bloc of white Southerners, ideologically descendant from the Democrats of 1865, now was voting for the Republicans' 1980 presidential candidate. The racial polarity got so bad that in 2005, Republican National Committee Chairman Ken Millman apologized to the NAACP, admitting that Republicans were in the wrong for the racially motivated policies they pursued in the 80s and 90s. It's a shame that such self-awareness is hardly ever seen today. Witt explains the rationale for the video with this.
People like to call Republicans very racist and things, but looking at the history, it's not really that way.
This is his first misstep. Historically, everyone was racist. Secondly, listing Republican accomplishments of 150 years ago misrepresents the party's contemporary character and neglects the fundamental ideological shift that occurred between the 1930s and 80s. The most important truths here are what is not said. All the times that Republicans resisted the expansion of civil rights, probably because knowledge of that list requires a lot more reading.